Michelangelo is a Florentine. If there is one truth to Florentines, they don't do ugly. Michelangelo took one look at these prototypes and is just, I'm not going to do that. And Michelangelo gave us a completely different view. A 23-year-old started thinking completely out of the box. He gave you a triangular composition. Mary's head is the apex, her body is the base, and it unites the mother and son like a living shroud. You have the body of Christ, which is draped very elegantly, not this sharp angular thing. It's draped very elegantly through her lap, like it's like almost like, again, many people have likened this to the sleeping Christ child. The focus of the work is on the body of Christ. Your initial focus and the initial high bar. Michelangelo knows when that goes in. Everybody who knows, anybody who knows anything about art is going to be looking at that and looking at how he renders the human body. That's the high bar. And so the body that he creates it's another great statement of the Renaissance. Part of that body is taken from ancient Greek art, ancient Greek classical art, where you have perfect proportion and perfect articulation. That is the body of the god Apollo. It doesn't get any better than that. And you have, in that body of Christ, you have that incredible elegance and that beautiful, beautiful sense of proportion. You have the loveliness that only the Greek aesthetic can really produce. However, Michelangelo did something that no Greek artist in his right mind would ever do. No Phidias, no Praxiteles would have ever actually looked at a dead body. So here are the strains of Giotto reappearing in Michelangelo when Michelangelo adds these extraordinarily poignant touches of Mary's hand under the shoulder and how the shoulder bunches up under the ear, the head that lolls backwards, the muscles slump inside the flesh of the thigh, and the detail I always find fascinating, you can't see it because of the glass in front of it, but the hand is dangling downwards and the blood is pooled and the veins are distended. The observations of a dead man placed into the body of a god. You just have, Michelangelo has just given you God and man in one. He's resolved that problem by uniting these two seemingly opposite types of imagery, and he puts them together to give us a Jesus that we can admire as the most beautiful thing we've ever seen, and yet we can feel that poignant tug of being able to relate to him in his lifelessness. It is utterly masterful. And the whole point of doing this is so that we begin to think of the Pietà differently from the Germans. The Germans give us a Pietà where we look at that beat-up body of Christ and we begin to get that incredible anxiousness. I can't believe they did that to him. Look what they did to his side. Look what they did to his hand. Look what they did to his head. Where we're caught up in the physical beating and we get that kind of almost visceral reaction. But when you look at Michelangelo's, you look at that beautiful body and you think, what did Mary think that day? What was Mary thinking when she was handed her son? And that boy, who she's known all along who he is. She's seen all along through that human surface, knowing that she is raising this extraordinary child. The day that this is all supposed to culminate, 33 years old, she's finished paying off the college loan. She should be sitting with the other mothers outside Nazareth going, your son's a doctor, your son's a lawyer, well, my son's God. She should be sitting around bragging to the other mothers. And this is the day, the moment that that beautiful son and all of these things that she's been nurturing gets handed back to her and she's to put it in the tomb. And we look at her face. It's an automatic. We look at her face to see, is there a little furrow about the, I don't think that was in the fine print. Well, how come Gabriel didn't mention this part? No, there's that face. That face, which is the endless subject of discussion in art. There are a million different interpretations, my least favorite being that Michelangelo's mother died when he was 6 and he was very sad when he was carving it, and so he's carved her face. I forget how the rest of that goes. Michelangelo was actually asked why, and he answers. And his answer was, do you not know that chaste women keep their fresh looks better and longer than unchaste women do? He obviously had never been to Hollywood. But don't you think that Mary the Virgin Mother of God, don't you think that she said, never a lascivious heart entered her chest, her heart, never a lascivious thought entered her heart? Don't you think she would have had even youthful and fresher looks? And then he says, and don't you think, since she was the chosen vessel in which God would incarnate himself, she would have some divine assistance? Michelangelo has just enunciated the whole workings of the Immaculate Conception, the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception for you. You know what art history says? He was joking. Not kidding. Most art history books will say, oh, and that little tongue-in-cheek response told everybody off. So the fact is, I think besides Michelangelo's, that answer, which is probably what he was thinking in part of, perhaps, I think perhaps the real answer to that question is look at that face. It's been up there long enough, you all should recognize it. It's the face of Mary in every single image of the Annunciation. When the angel Gabriel comes to her and said, she answers, I am the handmaiden of the Lord, let it be done to me according to thy will. The fiat that Mary gave to God when she was 13, 14, 15, 33 years later, it's that same Mary, it's that same girl still saying yes. What, and this is just this Michelangelo misogynist stuff, what an incredible image of this constancy, this fortitude of womanhood that Michelangelo gives us in this Bless You image of Mary. The final note I'm going to make about this work before we move on to the other artist here, the final note I'm going to make about this work is its Eucharistic function. This is another thing that's frequently kind of not analyzed in Michelangelo's art. Michelangelo's work is very odd in that I think you all notice, any of you who've been here, you're probably noticing already, Mary's lap is mighty big. Okay? Michelangelo does have a technical problem here. You are putting a grown man on a woman's lap. There's no way you can make that look normal. And so Michelangelo chooses to make her lap enormous to avoid the awkwardness you see in those German versions. The German versions actually, they prey on that awkwardness, whereas Michelangelo doesn't want that. He wants it to look very natural. And so he makes Mary's lap enormous. Note Mary's lap is not quite big enough. Even though he fills her lap and she can take that body, you'll notice that the weight of the Christ is actually balanced on a fold of cloth. All of that, the whole concentration of the weight of Christ's body is poised in a very funny way where it looks like at any given moment it's going to slide off her lap. This is accentuated by the fact she holds him here and the other hand is already let go in the gesture of what can only be offering, although I have read the mute gesture of grief. When we put this all together with the fact that it was an altarpiece, and you realize that Cardinal de Grula left enough money to make sure masses would be said for his soul from 1500 to 1975, you realize that when you get to, when Mass was celebrated in that work, and you get to consecration, and you would lift the host, that this is my body which will be given up for you. The body of Christ, you would have the host right about here. Then you would have the body of Christ, which is polished differently from Mary's robes. It's actually polished so highly that it's reflective. It's a shining white disc of the host. It's a shining white body of Christ. And then you have Mary and, see that? That's a humeral veil. Mary's touching him through a piece of cloth. She's not actually touching his flesh, but she's touching him through a piece of cloth. You have Mary, who is bringing the body to Mary the Church, who is bringing the body to the sacrifice. Michelangelo, 25 years old, he breaks the barrier of space and time. He gives you a work of art that comes out of its space and into your space. And on top of everything else, it represents the sacrifice of the Mass in real time on the altar while it's happening. I mean, you can see this kid, they're never going to let, he's on a retractable leash from that moment on. They're going to be bringing him back to Rome. But we see in the Renaissance, what makes this work great is not a humanism that celebrates a secular return to the pagan, but a truly moving and beautiful way of co-opting the beauty of antiquity and being able to repropose it in a purely, completely Christian context. What the Franciscans and the Dominicans have been working on for 100 years artistically, you now have its greatest flowering in the Renaissance, when the Renaissance can take the rivalry of its pagan past. It's so comfortable with who it is that it can take the rivalry from its pagan past, draw what the ancients did, look at it clinically and say, this is good, this wasn't quite good enough, and then they can reproject it into something new. The rest of the works I'm going to show you, that is the theme behind all of them, a renaissance, which is not a return to the pagan values of antiquity, but a renaissance that is comfortable with getting in the ring with this magnificent and glorious and monumental past, but know that this past can be wrestled down by the great geniuses that come from the Christian age. So we have the flint to spark Michelangelo. There he is, the golden boy of Rome. Everything he does, everybody loves him. He goes back to Florence. He makes his David. He's a rising star. And all of a sudden, in the bullpen, they bring in a newcomer. And he's 8 years younger. He's Raphael Sanzio. Raphael comes from a little town called Urbino in the Marche, so he's not from the heavy hitter Florence. But this boy, everywhere he goes, he's accompanied by these letters of people who say, you gotta meet this Raphael guy. This Raphael guy is incredible. He's extremely handsome, ununbelievably charming, easy to get along with, probably played golf, like Michelangelo did. The fact is that he starts out as a student of Perugino. People often make the mistake of considering him a copycat, but a lot of his motifs and a lot of his work, some of his early work is really, he's expected to be able to work on a Perugino painting so closely that Perugino can sign it and nobody would know the difference. But you can feel already Raphael's concerned with creating more movement, more life. Here you move the figures inwards. Perugino has a thing for the cake line. When I was in college, we could always spot the Perugino in the unknown slides because they're always like about to get into like a giant cake line. Here you have this sort of slight curve inwards and this beautiful turn in the head. Already very subtle motions. I think about it kind of like when you're doing kind of crazed things in gyms, and all of a sudden they want you to do this tiny little motion, which hurts more than anything else. These tiny little motions, these subtle little things that transform the flavor of a Raphael painting. He is a painter that we do not appreciate this very much this age. I find trying to get people to like Raphael feels an awful lot like beating my head against a wall. People don't like Raphael because he's not as cool as Michelangelo. He's not got that rugged, leave me alone type of personality of Michelangelo. He's good with the team. He gives his fellow workers a lot of credit. He was easy to get along with. He had a nice, normal personal life that doesn't allow for any sort of homosexual meditations, and so that means a great deal of our history lost interest. And the fact is he's subtle, and a lot of the times you have to kind of change your expectations to be able to understand that in that subtlety there is an incredible richness and an unbelievable individual vision. He is a great, great painter. This is another work this is by Perugino again, but you see he's sort of working on variations of this Perugino lineup. He then goes to Florence in 1504, and these two works are being produced while he is in Florence. Michelangelo's extraordinary Doni Tondo. This is a work that I went into last night. It's just, I think, one of the most amazing private paintings in the history of art. Michelangelo's one and only painted panel where you see this incredible painting of Mary. I mean, look at that. Look at the figure painting. Just you sit down, pull out a piece of paper, and try to do that. It is incredibly difficult. And so you see this turning of Mary reaching back at the Christ child, and then the even more complex, this is one you don't realize right away, how incredibly complicated it is to paint that particular infant child who's he's like a tightly wound spring ready to step forward into the world. And then the whole beauty of this work is that motion that you see in this work, she's like a spring that's been wound up, and so you feel her whole body is kind of in tension, twisted backwards, and your eye and your whole person waits for that tension to be resolved and to come back. It's like music, you kind of wait for a chord to be resolved. You're waiting for that tension to be resolved. She's picking up baby Jesus, and we understand that tension will only be resolved when the baby Jesus is planted in the foreground of the painting right here between you and me, when the child is given to us. And the only place where that child can go, the only room left in that painting, is the place where we enter into the space of the work of art, that fourth wall, as they use in TV speak. And so it is an incredible sense of what it means for Christ to come into the world. And in the proper context of the painting, we would actually refer to it as beauty coming into the world. The Mona Lisa, on the other hand, is a whole new way of looking at portraiture, a whole new way of looking at the relationship of a human being in painting. It's not going to be something I pursue in this discussion. It's a little bit too art history-y. Raphael's first fruits of his Florentine trip is this painting called The Coronation of the Virgin, which was painted for Perugia. It's a huge deal that Raphael, who's 19 years old, is already doing full-scale altarpieces. It's a sign that you've got a real comer here. The upper part of the painting is about as Perugino as it gets. You've got the kick line, you just be waiting, step, step, kick. You have the heads with wings up here, typical of the Umbrian painting. But here, he's been looking at Leonardo. And you can tell because he puts the sarcophagus in obliquely. And in doing so, it forces the apostles to gather in a kind of more dramatic way. They're thickly clustered here, then they thin out, and then you have lone Thomas, who looks up at Mary, who looks down at him. And Raphael is interested in resolving these two spaces in art. He's interested in resolving the heavenly space and the earthly space, and he does it through this very lovely triangle. Christ looks at his mother, who looks down at Thomas, and he unites the upper and lower part towards sentiment. This work and a couple others will get him his biggest break. It's 1509, and he is brought to paint the apartments of Julius II. This is the celebrity death match of the 16th century. This was, the eyes of the world were riveted. Had we had 24-hour cable TV, you would have had nothing but satellite trucks around the Vatican 24 hours a day, and commentators expressing, today we saw Raphael coming out, he looked very tired. Perhaps the pressure is getting to him because Michelangelo is right across the way painting the Sistine Chapel. Raphael was painting the Stanza della Segnatura, 1509, 1513. Michelangelo was painting the roots of Julius II to 1513. Michelangelo was painting the Sistine Chapel, 1508 to 1512. World's greatest painter, world's greatest sculptor, 50 feet from each other, duking it out for supremacy in art. What's the prize? The prize is who will be seen as the first artist of Europe. Artists, even Giotto, even Cavallini, all the people we've been talking about, they are all craftsmen. I made a brief allusion to this yesterday at the end of the day. They are all considered craftsmen. Leonardo da Vinci, one day he's painting the Last Supper, the next day he has to do a belt buckle. Botticelli, one day he's painting in the Sistine Chapel, the next day women show up at his studio saying, could you paint my makeup on tonight because I have a really big party. That's an artist's job was anything, a painter's job was anything that came your way. Michelangelo was asked to do a snowman once. The fact of the matter is that the prize at stake here, one of these men, or both of these men, will be recognized as people who work with this as much as with this. This is the greatest moment for the history of art because it's the moment that the artist comes out of simply being a guy working away in a studio with his hands. It goes from being a manual labor to a collaborative effort between the mind, the spirit, and the hands. And when I get very angry at artists today who co-opt that title, it's because I know what it took for Michelangelo, Leonardo, Raphael. I know the things that they faced in order to earn that title. It amazes me that someone can put some spots on a piece of cardboard and tell me that's art, or make a profession out of taking off your clothes to bad music and have that called art. We had another term for it, but apparently we don't want to use that term anymore. The Stanza della Segnatura was the throne room of Pope Julius II. The Sistine Chapel was the private chapel. They are equal, almost, in stature and their importance. Julius II would have received heads of state in there. I like to put in this picture because this is the man who wrote the program for the Stanza della Segnatura. Very unappreciated, very much a genius. He was the humanist of Julius II. This man, Inghirani, very famous for liking his food, and he was something of a foodie, we know that about him. But there's some really kind of cute jokes in some of the paintings regarding him. But he was a genius. And he is the one who wrote the whole program that I'm about to explain to you. And the thing about Raphael, He tells you who helps him, because he's a very modest, mellow kind of guy. The painting starts, the room starts with, this is where the throne of Julius II would have been here. The subject of this wall is what we call the law wall. Whoops, a daisy. Here we have, this is Justinian receiving all Roman law from 500 BC to 500 AD. This is Gregory IX receiving the origin, and it's the Decretals, and it's the origin of canon law. Here are virtues framing the Pope. They are temperance, prudence, fortitude, prudence, temperance, and then right here above his head is justice. Across from it you have Parnassus. I should point out that these two images separated by the window are the theme of the room. It's all about dual nature. This is the dual nature of the papacy. Church, you have on this side the temporal law. Here you have spiritual. Here you have dual nature of the arts. Apollo and the Nine Muses, great poets from all time. 4 poets get to be at the top of the mountain. They are Homer, Virgil, Stazio, and Dante. God inspired Homer so that someday Dante would write the Divine Comedy. But there's an idea of God is acting through the arts. These guys write poems about the cute girl who lives across the street. Catchy, not necessarily life-changing. And then here we come. Ooh, that is very dark. Bummer. This is the painting that shows the dual nature of the church. It is called the Disputation. It should be called, it would never have been called the Disputation by Raphael. He would have called it theology. Ingirami would have called this painting faith, whereas this painting would have been called either philosophy or reason. It is the dialogue between these two paintings, which is where Raphael showed his ability to think and to interpret along with the best of them. The thing about the theology painting, if you look at them, the theology painting has, it's divided up into 2, church militant on the bottom, church triumphant on the top. The philosophy painting has Plato and Aristotle in the middle, and you have great abstract thinkers. Plato represents the abstract thought, and Aristotle, whose hand is reaching forward, represents physical science, which is represented down here. The Disputation has an endless setting. You'll notice one of the very first things about this painting is that for a town that has 900 churches, it's kind of weird that there's no architecture in the painting that represents the church. But instead you have an endless setting, actually a deliberate sense of an endlessness, because there actually is no point, you'll know this as theologians, there is actually no point where you know more about God than God does. But there's a yellow color down here which indicates there comes a moment when you begin to see the light. Here you see a structure which is architectural. Raphael paints this idea of philosophy in an architectural structure. And by doing that, he's showing you another metaphor for what the ancients gave us. They taught us how to build and construct things in a way that would last, just like the system of philosophy lasts. He also teaches us that architecture organizes and dominates your body of space the same way that philosophy organizes and dominates your body of knowledge. But the genius of this work, and this is strictly to a painter, this is what a painter would be worried about. Painters are supposed to put as many figures as they can into the painting. Raphael has 60 in either one. No figure is allowed to choose scenery. None of this kind of sitting around doing nothing. So what you see is fascinating. What you see is fascinating in the way this is put together is that the figures, they start out on the sides, and each one gradually draws your eye towards the center. So you have one man pointing here. This is the Pope's nephew. Then he's pointing. You have kneeling figures. You have pointing hands. And you have a hand pointing upwards. You move through the church militant into the church triumphant. As a matter of fact, he doesn't need architecture in this building, in this painting, because if ecclesia is a people called together, here are the people streaming down the aisles. Here is the choir of the church with the apostles and the prophets side by side. There is the resurrected Christ at the altar, and here is God the Father in the apse. He's actually constructing the church out of people. Whereas in this painting we have 1, 2, 3 arches, and they focus in on these central figures. They are the beginning of all the movement. It's a very Leonardo-esque idea. It's as if you have still water, and Plato and Aristotle are pebble dropped in it, and you see the figures that move out like ripples. You have the great abstract thinkers. This is Socrates over here, and now coming downwards. From abstract thought, we flow into physical science. Look how they're organized. Teachers around students. Here's Euclid, here are his students. Here is Pythagoras, here are his students. Here is a graduate class with Ptolemy and Zoroaster, and that figure over there is Raphael, who's attending, and that's Tommaso Inghirami dressed up as Epicure over there in the corner writing. And so the beauty of this painting is its complementarity. Think about what Raphael is showing you in this painting. That in the painting of, in the representation of theology, you see all of these different people from different kinds of backgrounds who are all moving upwards, contributing contributing an insight to a single revelation. In the case of philosophy, we see from the origins of philosophy, we see this ever-growing body of knowledge which is transmitted generation by generation by teaching. And the fact is that this is a world that is horizontal. Is a world, philosophy is for this world. Theology is to help us understand beyond. They complement each other beautifully. They are the most complementary paintings in art. But as it just so happens, they do draw out the distinct nature of each subject. And this is the beauty of it. As Raphael was painting this, Michelangelo was working on the Sistine Chapel. So there's Raphael, who's all excited about this work he's just produced. And Michelangelo gives you this. So things get complicated. I'm actually going to skip this and go straight to the Sistine Chapel. The Sistine Chapel closes our discussions. Michelangelo was working on this simultaneously while Raphael was upstairs. I think many of you know it was a commission he didn't want. He famously complained about it. This is a poem he wrote. This is from a poem he wrote complaining about standing for 3.5 years painting the Sistine Chapel ceiling. As a matter of fact, he felt somewhat duped. He had been called down to Rome to paint, not to paint, but to sculpt. This is the plan for the tomb of Julius II. They brought down the world's most famous sculptor, the man who did the Pietà and the David, and they said, would you do a giant 40-foot by 20-foot tomb for me? And so Michelangelo offered what is essentially the eighth wonder of the world, drops everything, comes down, starts working on it, only to be told 1.5 years into it, oh, sorry, we can't do that right now. Could you do the Sistine Chapel? And that meditation he has on the tomb, he's going to translate into the work of art that broke one of the last great barriers in art.